Level 1, the morning that changed everything. This morning there was no alarm clock. Not because you forgot to set one, because you haven't needed one in months. You wake up naturally at 7:24 a.m., stretch for a moment, make yourself a cup of coffee, and stand by the kitchen window as the neighborhood slowly comes alive. Across the street, your neighbor rushes out the front door, coffee in one hand, laptop bag in the other. He backs his SUV onto the road, joins the endless stream of traffic, and disappears toward another workday that looks exactly like yesterday. He never notices you're watching. He's in a hurry. You're not. You're 35 years old. You haven't worked a traditional job in nearly 4 months. And no, this isn't one of those stories where someone got rich overnight. There wasn't a lucky crypto trade. There wasn't a winning lottery ticket. No wealthy relatives left behind a fortune. No startup suddenly made you a millionaire. Instead, there were spreadsheets, budgets, countless ordinary decisions that nobody else noticed, and 8 years of making financial choices that felt uncomfortable while everyone around you was doing the opposite. People call this early retirement, but after living it, you realize that's not really what it is. You're not retiring from life, you're retiring from the obligation to trade your time for money. Those are two very different things, and the path to getting here didn't begin with some motivational speech or life-changing book. It started with something much smaller, a paycheck, and a sinking feeling. 8 years earlier. You're 27 years old. You've already spent 5 years working full-time after college. On paper, everything looks fine. You have a stable position as a project coordinator at a software company. Your salary is about $74,000 a year. Friends tell you you're doing well. Your parents are proud. Your coworkers assume you're on the right track. But one evening, after paying your monthly bills, you glance at your bank account. Then you look back at your paycheck. Something doesn't make sense. Every 2 weeks, money comes in. Every 2 weeks, it somehow disappears. Not because you're buying designer clothes, not because you're partying every weekend, not because you're addicted to shopping. You're simply paying rent, insurance, groceries, transportation, and all the ordinary expenses that come with being an adult in a major American city. At the end of every month, you're lucky if there's a few $100s left. Sometimes it's $200, sometimes $350, rarely more. Then a thought hits you. You've been working for 5 years. Where did all the money go? That question refuses to leave your mind. You realize you've spent years exchanging thousands of hours for paychecks, yet your financial life hasn't really moved forward. For the first time, you're forced to confront a possibility that's deeply uncomfortable. Maybe earning more money isn't the problem. Maybe it's the system you've been following. That night, you open your laptop, not because you have a plan, because you're looking for an answer. You type a question you've never asked before. How much money would it actually take to never need a job again? At first, it's just curiosity. You expect unrealistic numbers, maybe $20 million, maybe some secret investment strategy that only Wall Street insiders know. Instead, you discover something called FIRE, Financial Independence, Retire Early. You've heard the acronym before, usually attached to headlines about people living on rice and beans, driving ancient cars, and refusing to spend money on anything fun. You always assumed it wasn't realistic, but this time you keep reading, hour after hour, and slowly something clicks. The concept isn't built around getting rich, it's built around controlling your expenses. If your investments can consistently generate enough income to cover the life you actually live, work becomes optional. Suddenly, retirement stops looking like an age, it becomes a number. For the first time in years, the future feels measurable, not based on hope, not based on luck, just math. So you decide to run your own numbers. You download 12 months of bank statements, every rent payment, every grocery bill, every gas station receipt, every streaming subscription, every coffee, every dollar. 40 minutes later, you finally know something you've never calculated before. Your lifestyle costs about $38,000 per year. That single number changes everything. Because now the goal isn't vague anymore, it's concrete. If your annual spending is around $38,000, then financial independence isn't some mysterious dream. It's a target you can actually aim for. When you compare that target to your current savings, reality hits hard. Your retirement account has just over $31,000. Your savings account holds barely $4,000. The distance between where you are and where you want to be feels enormous. But instead of feeling defeated, you feel strangely relieved. For the first time, the problem has a shape. And once a problem has a shape, it can be solved. Level 2, the first real sacrifice. Knowing the number didn't change your life, but it changed the way you looked at every financial decision after that. For the next few days, you couldn't stop thinking about one idea. If financial freedom was really just a math problem, then every dollar you spent was either moving you closer to freedom or pushing it farther away. That realization was uncomfortable, not because it told you to stop spending, because it forced you to ask whether every expense was actually buying happiness or just convenience. You went back to everything you'd learned about financial independence. One idea kept showing up: the 4% rule. Historically, if you accumulated roughly 25 times your yearly living expenses and invested that money in broadly diversified index funds, your portfolio could potentially support your lifestyle for decades through modest annual withdrawals. It wasn't magic, it wasn't a shortcut, it was decades of market history translated into a simple formula. For the first time, retirement wasn't tied to turning 65, it was tied to reaching a number, and numbers can be planned for. The next morning, you opened your retirement account. Your contribution rate had been sitting at 3% ever since HR automatically enrolled you. You barely remembered setting it. Without overthinking it, you increased it to 22%. It felt reckless. Watching your future paychecks shrink overnight was almost painful. Then you made another decision. You moved. Not across the country, just across town. Your new apartment wasn't glamorous. The kitchen was smaller, the commute was a little longer. The neighborhood wasn't quite as convenient. But every month, your rent dropped by hundreds of dollars. Most people would have seen that as a downgrade. You saw something different. Every lower monthly bill bought you a little more freedom. Those two decisions didn't make you financially independent. They simply changed the direction of your life. The real work would happen over the next 8 years. Around that time, your best friend Ben seemed to be living the dream. You'd known each other since college. Smart guy, hard worker, the kind of person everyone assumed would be successful. And honestly, he was doing exactly what society tells you to do. After landing a better paying job, Ben bought a brand new SUV. Nothing outrageous, just something reliable. He rented a larger apartment because he'd earned it. He upgraded his phone every couple of years. He traveled whenever airline deals popped up. Dinner out became the default instead of the exception. Every decision made sense by itself. Nothing looked irresponsible. That's what made it so dangerous. Ben wasn't making bad choices. He was making normal choices. And normal is expensive. One evening, while grabbing dinner together, Ben joked about his monthly car payment. $560, he laughed. Worth every penny. You smiled. But later that night, you did the math. Over 6 years, that payment alone would cost more than $40,000. Invested instead, it could grow into something much larger. Not because cars are bad, because opportunity cost is invisible. Nobody sees the investment they never made. That's the part personal finance rarely talks about. Every dollar has two jobs: the one you spend it on today and the one it could have done for your future. Most people only see the first. You had started seeing both. The strange part was, you never tried to convince Ben. You never lectured him about investing. You never explained FIRE over dinner. Because unsolicited financial advice rarely changes anyone. It usually just makes them defensive. Everyone has to discover those numbers for themselves. So your friendship stayed exactly the same. The only thing that changed was the way you looked at money. Months turned into years. Life didn't suddenly become exciting. There weren't any viral success stories, no six-figure side hustle, no lucky investment that doubled overnight. Instead, life became wonderfully predictable. Whenever you received a raise, you invested almost all of it. When your income increased, your lifestyle barely changed. While coworkers upgraded apartments, you stayed where you were. While friends financed newer cars, you kept driving your old Honda. It wasn't flashy, but every morning it started, and every month it saved you money. Slowly, something incredible began happening. At first, your investments grew because of your contributions. Then, something changed. The investments themselves started earning money. Those gains created more gains. Then those gains produced even more. Compound interest stopped being something you read about. It became something you could actually watch. The process still felt painfully slow, until one day, it didn't. You looked at your portfolio and realized something surprising. The market had earned more money for you that year than your own monthly contributions. For the first time, your money had started working harder than you were, and that changes the game completely. That's the moment most people never reach because they quit too early, or lifestyle inflation quietly steals every raise before it ever reaches an investment account. You chose a different path, not because it was easy, because every sacrifice finally had a purpose. You weren't saving money just to have more money. You were buying back your future, one paycheck at a time. Level 3, the years nobody sees. People love talking about overnight success because it's exciting. It's easy to package into a headline, and it makes success feel like a lucky break. But financial independence doesn't work that way. The most important years are usually the most boring ones. No dramatic breakthroughs, no viral business, no winning investments. Just ordinary decisions repeated over and over again. From age 27 to 34, your life looked almost identical from the outside. You woke up, went to work, came home, invested your paycheck, and repeated the cycle. Most people would have called those years uneventful. In reality, they were building the foundation for everything that came later. Every annual raise followed the same pattern. Instead of upgrading your lifestyle, you upgraded your investments. When your salary increased, your spending barely moved. Friends celebrated promotions by buying bigger homes. You celebrated by increasing automatic deposits into your index funds. It wasn't exciting, but it was incredibly powerful, because every dollar you invested early had years to grow. And eventually, time started doing more work than you ever could. Of course, the journey wasn't smooth. There were moments that tested everything you believed. One year, the stock market dropped hard. Your portfolio lost nearly $60,000 on paper. In just a few months, years of savings seemed to disappear. Every financial headline screamed the same message: sell before it gets worse. This time is different. Another recession is coming. Friends started asking if you were worried. Honestly, you were. Watching tens of thousands of dollars disappear isn't easy, even when you know it's temporary. Your instincts told you to protect what was left. But investing has a strange rule. The moments that feel safest to sell are often the worst times to do it. So instead of panicking, you did absolutely nothing. You kept investing. You ignored the headlines. You trusted the plan you'd built years earlier. Months later, the market recovered. Then it climbed even higher. That experience taught you something no finance book ever could. The biggest threat to your portfolio wasn't the market, it was your own emotions. Not every challenge came from investing. Some came from life itself. At 31, your company offered you a promotion. Higher salary, more prestige, a new title. There was only one catch. It required relocating to one of the most expensive cities in the country. At first, the opportunity sounded perfect, until you ran the numbers. The higher paycheck looked impressive, but after accounting for housing, taxes, transportation, and everyday living costs, you'd actually end up saving less. The promotion would make your career look better, but it would push financial independence back by almost 2 years. For most people, the decision would have been obvious: take the title. For you, the answer was different. You declined the offer. Not because ambition disappeared, because you had redefined success. Success wasn't climbing the corporate ladder anymore. Success was owning your time. The hardest sacrifice wasn't financial, it was personal. During those years, you were in a serious relationship. You cared deeply about each other. But slowly, it became clear that your visions for the future weren't the same. One imagined a larger house, luxury vacations, new cars every few years. The other imagined freedom. Neither dream was wrong. They simply pointed in different directions. Eventually, you both realized love alone couldn't solve fundamentally different priorities. Walking away hurt. For weeks, you questioned whether the price of financial independence was too high. But deep down, you knew something important. Compromise works for many things. Core values aren't usually one of them. Sometimes the most expensive financial decisions have nothing to do with money. As the years passed, something unexpected happened. People began asking questions. Not because you looked wealthy, you didn't. You still drove an older car, you still lived in a modest apartment, you still packed lunch for work more often than not. The question was always the same: how are you saving so much? Most assumed you were miserable, that you were constantly denying yourself, that every purchase felt like a painful sacrifice. The truth surprised them. You weren't obsessed with spending less, you were obsessed with spending intentionally. You cooked because you enjoyed cooking. You borrowed books because reading mattered more than owning them. You traveled less often, but when you did travel, you experienced it more fully because you weren't worrying about credit card bills afterward. Your life didn't feel smaller, it felt simpler. And simplicity turned out to be much more satisfying than constant consumption. That's the part most people misunderstand. Financial independence isn't about saying no to everything. It's about saying yes, only to the things that genuinely improve your life. Everything else becomes surprisingly easy to ignore. Then one afternoon, almost without realizing it, you refreshed your investment account. The number on the screen made you stop. $900, $950, $960,000. You stared for several seconds. Not because you couldn't believe the number, because you remembered where this journey started. 5 years of working with almost nothing to show for it. A browser search, a spreadsheet, one difficult decision after another. Now the finish line wasn't somewhere in the distance, it was finally within reach. But you still weren't ready. Because reaching financial independence isn't just about having enough money, it's about trusting that enough is actually enough. And that turned out to be the hardest decision of all. Level 4, the freedom nobody can see. At the beginning of 2024, your portfolio crossed $1 million. You didn't celebrate, you didn't post about it online, you didn't tell your coworkers. Instead, you opened another spreadsheet. Because reaching a milestone isn't the same as trusting it. For the next several months, you challenged every assumption. What if the market crashed next year? What if healthcare costs doubled? What if inflation stayed higher than expected? What if the first few years of retirement happened during a recession? Every scenario pointed to the same conclusion. You weren't looking for certainty, you were building a margin of safety. So instead of leaving immediately, you waited. You let your investments continue growing until they reached roughly $1.05 million. That extra cushion wasn't about mathematics, it was about confidence. Finally, one ordinary Tuesday morning, you walked into work carrying a single envelope. Inside was your resignation letter. No dramatic speech, no emotional goodbye, just one page that quietly ended a chapter that had lasted nearly a decade. When HR asked the question they ask everyone, "So, where are you going next?" You smiled. "I'm not taking another job." There was a pause. "So, you're retiring?" You nodded. For a second, she looked confused. Then she smiled politely, finished the paperwork, and wished you luck. To everyone else, it looked like someone quitting a job. To you, it felt like buying back your life. Driving home that afternoon, something surprised you. You expected excitement. You expected relief, maybe even celebration. Instead, there was silence. A strange kind of silence. The kind you only notice after a constant noise finally disappears. For years, your life had been organized around work. Deadlines, meetings, performance reviews, vacation requests, Sunday evening anxiety. Without realizing it, that pressure had become normal. Now, it was gone. Not replaced, simply gone. That feeling was impossible to describe. It wasn't happiness, it was lightness. That evening, Ben called. He already knew you had resigned. He just didn't know why. "So, what's next?" he asked. You looked around your apartment. Honestly, you didn't have an answer. "I don't know yet," he laughed. "That would terrify me." You thought about that for a moment, then quietly replied, "It doesn't terrify me anymore." There was a long pause. Finally, Ben asked the question that mattered. "Can you show me how you did it?" It wasn't really about investing, or retirement, or money. It was the same question you'd asked yourself years ago. Is there another way to live? That question changed your life. Maybe it would change his too. 4 months later, your mornings still begin without an alarm. Not because sleeping late is the goal. Most days, you're awake before 8 anyway. The difference is simple. You wake up because your body is ready, not because someone else decided when your day begins. You read books that used to collect dust on your shelf. You cook meals without checking the clock every 5 minutes. You work out because you have energy, not because you're forcing yourself through exhaustion. Ironically, you feel more productive now than you did during most of your career. But there was one thing nobody warned you about. Freedom requires structure. Work used to organize your life automatically. Monday had meaning. Friday had meaning. The calendar gave every day a purpose. When that disappears, you have to build your own rhythm. At first, that felt surprisingly difficult. Not because you missed your job, because you'd spent years letting someone else manage your time. Now, every hour belonged to you. And learning how to use complete freedom turned out to be its own skill. Financially, the system worked exactly as planned. Your investments remained spread across simple, low-cost index funds. No complicated trading, no guessing the next hot stock, no chasing headlines. Once a year, you rebalanced your portfolio. Once every few months, you withdrew enough to cover your living expenses. Nothing more, nothing less. The money quietly continued doing what it had been trained to do for years: support your life, without demanding your time in return. Sometimes old coworkers ask what retirement feels like. Some assume you must be bored. Others think you secretly started another business. A few believe there must have been luck involved. It's easier for people to believe in luck than discipline, because luck asks nothing from them. Discipline asks difficult questions. What they don't see are the Saturday nights you stayed home instead of spending hundreds downtown. The apartment you chose because it fit your plan, not because it impressed strangers. The raises you invested instead of spending. The vacations you postponed. The purchases you skipped. The thousands of tiny decisions that never made for exciting stories. People notice freedom. They rarely notice what purchased it. Here's the truth. Financial independence isn't really about money. Money is just the tool. The real reward is ownership. Ownership of your mornings. Ownership of your schedule. Ownership of your attention. Ownership of your life. That's why this story isn't about retiring at 35. It's about refusing to let default decisions determine the next 40 years of your future. Because that's exactly what happens to most people. They never consciously choose their lives. They simply inherit them. One monthly payment at a time. One lifestyle upgrade at a time. One paycheck at a time. Until decades have passed. This morning, you stood at the same kitchen window with another cup of coffee. Right on schedule, your neighbor backed out of his driveway. The traffic looked exactly the same. The routine looked exactly the same. He disappeared around the corner. You stayed where you were. No meetings, no commute, no inbox demanding your attention. Just another quiet morning that belonged entirely to you. Some people would call that retirement. Others would call it financial independence. But maybe neither term captures it perfectly. Maybe the better word is freedom. Not the kind money can buy overnight, the kind built slowly, one intentional decision at a time. Because in the end, the greatest investment you'll ever make isn't in the stock market. It's in creating a life where your time finally belongs to you.